You know, sometimes the past doesn't whisper, it screams. And no matter how far you walk, those echoes follow you. My name is Margaret. I am 58 years old. And I have lived a life that feels heavier than the years I've carried. I wasn't always this woman you see. Once, I was a mother with dreams stitched into every corner of my home. I believed in family dinners, in laughter echoing through hallways, in the promise that love could hold us together. But promises, they break, and when they do, they leave scars deeper than any wound. My son, Daniel, he was my world. I raised him alone after his father walked away. I thought I gave him everything, my time, my strength, my sacrifices. But sometimes, love isn't enough. Sometimes, the very people you bleed for are the ones who push you out into the cold. The day he told me to leave, I can still hear it. His words weren't loud, but they cut sharper than any knife. Mom, I can't do this anymore. You're holding me back, holding him back. I gave him my life. And yet, in that moment, I became a burden. A stranger in my own home. I remember packing my things, a suitcase that felt too light for a lifetime. I left behind photographs, furniture, the smell of Sunday mornings. I left behind the sound of his footsteps. And as I closed the door, I realized sometimes exile doesn't come from nations. It comes from the people you love most. Do you know what it feels like to be erased? To walk out of a house you built, only to realize it no longer remembers you. That's when I learned, home isn't walls. Home is the people who choose to keep you. And when they don't, you wander. But wandering isn't the end. It's the beginning of a different kind of story. One where you discover who you are when everything you thought defined you is gone. So tonight, I will tell you my story. Not because it is easy, but because silence is heavier than words. And maybe, just maybe, someone out there will hear me and know they are not alone. When the door closed behind me, it wasn't just wood shutting me out. It was my son's love, my years of sacrifice, my identity as a mother, all sealed away. And I stood there, suitcase in hand, staring at a street that suddenly felt foreign. I walked. I didn't know where. My feet carried me through neighborhoods I once drove past without notice. Funny how the world looks different when you have nowhere to go. Every porch light felt like a reminder. Someone belongs there. But me, I belonged nowhere. That first night, I slept in a bus station. The bench was cold. The air smelled of gasoline and loneliness. I clutched my suitcase like it was a lifeline. Inside were clothes, a few letters, and a photograph of Daniel when he was 5. His smile in that picture, it was the kind of smile that made me believe I was doing something right. But now, I wondered if I had failed him, or if he had failed me. People think exile is dramatic, shouting, slamming doors. But sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just a sentence spoken too calmly. You're holding me back. And then silence. That silence is worse than anger, because silence means they've already let you go. The days blurred. I wandered from shelter to shelter, sometimes finding a bed, sometimes not. I learned the rhythm of survival, where to get soup, where to find warmth, how to keep your head down. And yet, in the midst of all that, I discovered something unexpected. People, strangers who had nothing, yet gave everything they could. There was a woman named Clara. She was 62, with hands rough from years of labor. She shared her blanket with me one night, whispering, "We're all stories waiting to be heard." That sentence stayed with me, because maybe that's what I was now, a story without a home, waiting for someone to listen. I began to write. On scraps of paper, napkins, anything I could find. I wrote about Daniel, about the house I lost, about the ache of being invisible. Writing became my anchor. Each word reminded me I still existed, even if the world had forgotten. But survival isn't just about food or shelter. It's about dignity. And dignity is the first thing the world tries to strip from you when you're cast out. People look at you differently. They see your worn shoes, your tired eyes, and they decide your worth. But I refused to let them decide mine. I was still Margaret. I was still a mother, a woman, a soul with stories. One evening, I found myself outside a church. The doors were open, light spilling out like hope. I stepped inside, not for prayer, but for silence. And in that silence, I realized something. Exile had given me a gift. It had stripped me bare, yes, but in that bareness, I could finally see myself, not as Daniel's mother, not as someone's burden, but as Margaret. Just Margaret. And that's when I made a vow. I would not let my story end on a bus station bench. I would not let rejection define me. I would carry my scars like armor. And I would speak loudly, because silence is heavier than words. And I had carried silence long enough. So this is where my journey truly began. Not in the house I lost, but in the streets I walked after. Because sometimes, the road after exile is the road to becoming. You don't realize how strong you are until strength is the only choice left. After weeks of wandering, I knew I couldn't keep drifting. Survival was not enough. I needed to live. And living meant finding a place where I wasn't invisible. It was a Tuesday morning. The city was waking up, buses roaring, shopkeepers unlocking doors, children rushing to school. I stood at the corner of Main Street, clutching my worn suitcase, and for the first time, I asked myself, what if I stopped waiting for someone to save me? What if I saved myself? That question became my anchor. I walked into a community center nearby. The sign outside read, Hope Haven. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and fresh paint. A woman at the desk looked up, smiled, and said, "You look like you could use a seat." That simple kindness felt like a doorway opening. Hope Haven wasn't just a building. It was a place where forgotten souls found each other. There were veterans, widows, young mothers, men who had lost jobs. Each carried their own exile. And yet, together, we became something more than our losses. We became a family of strangers. I started volunteering there. At first, it was small, sweeping floors, serving soup. But every task gave me back a piece of dignity. People began to know my name. Margaret, they'd say. Thank you. And I realized belonging doesn't always come from blood. Sometimes it comes from choice. One evening, Clara, the woman who once shared her blanket with me, found me at Hope Haven. She laughed, saying, "See? I told you we're all stories waiting to be heard." And for the first time, I believed her. My story wasn't over. It was just beginning again. I began teaching small writing classes there. Just scraps of poetry, journaling, storytelling. People who thought they had no voice discovered they could speak. And in helping them, I found my own voice growing louder. Words became my bridge back to life. But rebuilding isn't just about finding new places. It's about facing old wounds. And my deepest wound was Daniel, my son. The boy I raised, the man who cast me out. Every night, his face haunted me. Did he regret it? Did he think of me? Or had he erased me completely? I knew I couldn't carry that question forever. So I wrote him a letter. Not to beg, not to accuse, but to tell him the truth. I wrote, "Daniel, I am not your burden. I am your mother. And whether you choose to remember me or not, I will continue to live." I didn't know if he would read it, but writing it freed me. That was the moment I understood. Forgiveness isn't about excusing what someone did. It's about refusing to let their choices chain you. I forgave him, not because he deserved it, but because I deserved peace. And with that peace, I began to dream again. Small dreams at first, a steady job, a safe room, a circle of friends. But dreams grow. And mine grew into something bigger. To tell my story, loudly so no one else would feel erased. So here I am, speaking to you. Not as a victim, not as a burden, but as a woman who walked through exile and found belonging on the other side. My scars are my proof. My voice is my gift. And my story is my freedom. When you've been silenced long enough, speaking feels like rebellion. But it also feels like freedom. At Hope Haven, I found more than shelter. I found a mirror. Every person there carried scars. And yet, when we shared our stories, those scars became bridges. I realized my story wasn't just mine. It was a thread in a larger tapestry of survival. One evening, the director of Hope Haven asked me to speak at a community gathering. "Margaret," she said, "your words heal. People need to hear you." I hesitated. I wasn't a speaker. I was just a woman who had lost her home. But maybe that was enough. The hall was small, filled with folding chairs and tired faces. I stood at the front, hands trembling, heart racing. And then I spoke. I told them about Daniel, about the suitcase, about the bus station bench. I told them about Clara's blanket, about the letter I wrote. And as I spoke, I saw heads nodding, eyes glistening. My pain was their pain. My survival was their survival. When I finished, there was silence. Then, applause. Not the polite kind, but the kind that comes from souls recognizing each other. In that moment, I knew my voice had power. And power, when shared, becomes hope. From that day, I began speaking more. At shelters, at schools, at churches. I told my story not to dwell on loss, but to show that loss can be the beginning of something new. People began to call me the storyteller. And for the first time in years, I felt seen. But telling my story wasn't just about me. It was about Daniel too. Every time I spoke, I hoped he might hear, somewhere, somehow. I didn't want revenge. I wanted him to know that the mother he cast out had risen. That she was not broken. That she was alive. And then, one night, after a talk at a local library, I saw him, Daniel, standing at the back, arms crossed, eyes heavy. My heart stopped. He didn't speak. He just listened. And when I finished, he walked away. No words, no embrace. Just silence. But that silence was different. It was an erasure. It was recognition. I don't know if he will ever forgive himself. I don't know if we will ever share a home again. But I do know this. I am no longer waiting. My life is mine. My voice is mine. And my story belongs to the world. So here I stand. Not as a victim, not as a burden, but as a woman. When you survive exile, you learn that your story is not just about you. It becomes a lantern for others lost in the dark. After that night when Daniel stood silently at the back of the library, something inside me shifted. I realized I no longer needed his words to validate me. His presence alone was enough. It meant he had heard me, and that was all I needed to keep moving forward. I began to travel beyond Hope Haven. Small towns, schools, community halls, anywhere people gathered, I went. I told my story again and again. Each time, the pain became less about me and more about the people listening. I saw in their eyes the same loneliness, the same scars. And when I spoke, I saw those scars soften. One young woman approached me after a talk. She said, "My mother abandoned me, and I thought I was alone. But hearing you, I feel seen." That moment reminded me why I spoke. Not for applause, not for recognition, but for connection. Because connection is what saves us. I started writing more seriously. Not just scraps on napkins, but full journals, essays, even a manuscript. Words that once felt like whispers now became chapters. And with each page, I built a legacy not of wealth, not of possessions, but of truth. Hope Haven published my first collection of stories. They called it Echoes of Silence. It was a book filled with voices of the forgotten mine. Clara's, others who had walked through exile. Holding that book in my hands felt like holding proof that we existed, that we mattered. Daniel never called. He never wrote back, but sometimes I would see him at the edge of the crowd, listening. And that was enough, because forgiveness had already freed me. I didn't need reconciliation to live. I only needed to keep walking. And so, I walked into new towns, new faces, new hearts. My story became a bridge, and I became its keeper. People began to say, "Margaret, you are hope." But I am not hope. I am proof. Proof that even when the world erases you, you can write yourself back into existence. So if you hear my voice tonight, know this: exile is not the end. Silence is not the end. You are not the end. You are a beginning waiting to be spoken. And when you speak, the world changes. This is my legacy. Not the house I lost, not the son who left, but the voice I found. And as long as I breathe, I will keep telling it. Because stories are the only way we survive. And mine is for you. Ho turned exile into strength. My scars are my proof. My words are my gift. And my journey is far from over. When my voice had filled the halls and libraries of the city, I thought peace had finally arrived. But peace is never complete. One day, I heard that Daniel was ill. The same son who had cast me out was now weak and silent. I decided to see him. The road was long, but my heart carried no burden. I reached his house, the same door I had once closed behind me. The door opened, and inside he lay on the bed. His eyes held the same question that had lived in mine for years. Are we still bound to each other? I said nothing. I sat beside him and held his hand. He said nothing either. Yet in that silence was everything words could never hold. Hours passed as we remained there. The wounds of the past, the pain of exile, all dissolved into that quiet. I understood then that sometimes the end of a story is not spoken, but lived in silence. When I left, I felt my journey was complete. I had given my voice to the world, and my silence to my son. Both were necessary. Years passed, and the world changed around me. The shelters grew, the voices multiplied, and the stories I once carried alone became part of a larger chorus. My book found its way into hands I would never meet, and my words traveled farther than my footsteps ever could. Daniel never spoke to me again, but I saw him once more, standing quietly at the back of a gathering. He did not approach, and I did not call out. That distance was no longer pain. It was simply truth. Some bonds remain broken, but even broken things can cast shadows of love. I lived the rest of my days not as an exile, but as a witness. I witnessed the strength of strangers, the courage of the forgotten, the beauty of survival. My story was never about loss alone. It was about the power to rise when silence tries to bury you. When my time came, I left behind no riches, no grand possessions. I left only words. Words that carried my journey, my scars, my forgiveness, and my hope. Words that belonged not just to me, but to anyone who had ever felt erased. This is my last gift, the reminder that exile is not the end. Silence is not the end, and despair is not the end. The end is only when you stop telling your story. And as long as my words are read, my voice will live.